with regards to FSSAI, Food Safety Standards Authority of India, which is the apex food regulator in the country, is now saying that we are going to assess a WHO report that has raised red flags on sugar substitutes. And when we say sugar substitutes, sweeteners like aspartame and stevia, if I'm pronouncing that correct, stevia, which is used in a lot of drinks that we consume on a daily basis, from your Pepsi to Coke, Zero, and many people believe that these are good sugar substitute, but WHO, they're saying it is not.
So Shweta, if you recall, I remember when Indra Nooyi had taken over as the CEO of PepsiCo internationally, the one thing on her agenda back then was to cut down on the amount of sugar that goes into the aerated beverages. And she was credited with also trying to kickstart, which she did, how successfully, history will tell, but to kickstart this revolution within PepsiCo to reduce sugar, to reduce salt in Lay's and the other, packaged snacks category, and also introduce healthier products like, pulp-based juices, which have a lower sugar content. So I remember, if the numbers, are accurate, one can of Pepsi before she took over had about 11 teaspoons of sugar. She was instrumental in cutting that down to 6 teaspoons of sugar, and the taste and the flavors were still kept intact with these sugar substitutes. And then there was this diet and zero versions of PepsiCo also introduced, which use these substitutes in a much greater measure. Now, stevia, of course, is a plant-based alternative. It's a leaf, pretty much, like the tulsi leaf, which has a certain flavor. Stevia is a naturally sweet leaf, which, which many people use even in their cups of tea as a natural sweetener. But WHO last week came out with its report stating that that there are certain chemicals which are used in sugar substitutes, and without naming brands, there are these substitutes that a lot of us use, and especially those who are at a pre-diabetic or are battling diabetes at various stages, prefer to use sugar substitutes in place of regular sugar. But the WHO report states that while it doesn't do any good to the diabetes, it also exacerbates other cardiovascular diseases by way of the composition, the chemical composition that goes into these substitutes. So I think it's a good timely wake-up call for FSSAI to really institute its own research and institute its own sort of findings and come out with a very, very clear and well articulated policy on what substitutes should be permitted in lieu of sugar. And then, of course, the raging debate on how much sugar, what percentage of sugar in packaged products should go in.
Let me quickly get in Rakesh here. Rakesh, a lot of debate recently on how much sugar is too much sugar, especially in the wake of Bonvita controversy. The fact that FSSAI is saying we're going to look at WHO guidelines at this stage, relatively new, relatively fresh, also is essentially, it gives you a sneak peek into what's happening at the food regulators side, because they have come under a lot of doubt and a lot of questions after they refused to take Bonvita controversy very seriously. They did wake up, but it was, some would say, a little too late.
Shweta, fair concerns there, but I have bigger macro concerns. Why in the first place should we look up to WHO? We are a sovereign nation. We have some of the best minds in this country. We should have an alert on our own, and the consumption and the growth of this sugar substitute industry has been on phenomenal rise. I'm not grudging the industry, but what I'm grudging is the failure of the regulators to look at it in a considered and concerted manner. Look, there is a side story here, which is that these sugar substitutes have become a key play in, especially among the youngsters and the millennials, in reducing weight. So there is some subterfuge play between the doctors and practitioners and the manufacturers, where the consumption is equally between those battling diabetes or trying to be at the cusp of pre-diabetic and not becoming a diabetic, and those, the new bucket that's emerging, Shweta, is the obese category, which is a very large piece in India, especially in urban India, where these are being consumed to reduce weight as an exercise in reducing weight. So my submission is that I've been making this pitch actually. All key economic regulators in this country, from a DGCA to FSSAI, they need a massive overhaul. Especially, DGCA again, because air safety, passenger safety, air travel. But in case of consumption, which is day-to-day consumption, airline is not a day-to-day consumption. We need to be as safe as we can be there. But when it comes to day-to-day consumption, there is need to bring about a larger intergovernment and interministerial approach to dealing with such issues, where consumption, new age trends, new age drugs, new age formulations are in play. So what I would recommend is that FSSAI on its own neither has the competence, the skill set, or I think the inclination
Okay.
to act go and chase it. So I would recommend the health ministry and the Department of Pharmaceuticals, which unfortunately is resident in the Ministry of Chemicals and Petrochemicals. And FSSAI is the food regulator governed by the Food and Consumers, Food Processing and Consumer Ministry. So a lot of work to be done when it comes to drawing a holistic policy to keep Indian consumers safe. See, in the era of internet, Indian consumers have access to all kinds of information, most of it not so correct and not so fair.
Right.
But trend spotting. So in that sense, they really lap onto trends where they feel obesity kam ho jayegi, we'll consume this. Diabetes patients feel that, oh, I need to have a crush for sugar. I'm not taking the normal sugar, I'm taking these. And so that has given rise to this massive industry which is advertising, fear of
Right.
it to advertise. But some regulatory overhang needs a complete recalibration to keep the Indian consumer.
Absolutely.
And
So
if I can speak on behalf of the coffee industry, go for black coffee.
go for black coffee without artificial sweetener.
With no sweetener,
With no sweetener
addition at all.
If you are somebody who takes artificial sweeteners, I think this is for you. Guidelines there issued by World Health Organization state that many of these sweeteners that claim to be healthy are not so much healthy, especially if you are borderlining diabetes. Please be very careful of what you're consuming.